Good morning and welcome to this meeting of the local review body for the 16th of November 2023. As is customary, I will introduce the top table. First of all, let me introduce myself. I'm Councillor Bob Braun. I'm the convener of the LRB. To my right is Bailey Claire McLaren, and to my left is Councillor Richard Waters. We are all by necessity members of the Planning Committee. To my far right is Mr. Ross Burton, who is an independent property advisor. He has had no involvement in any of the cases that we hear today. His only involvement started when that appeal was made. To my far left is Mr. Colin Elliott, who is our legal advisor for today, and to his far left is Jess Guild, who is our committee services clerk. I would like to take the opportunity to thank our members here this morning because we normally sit on a Monday at 1 o'clock. We've had to change the day because I have to be in London on Monday. So my thanks to all of them to agreeing to come today. A special thanks to Jess for organising all this. So the next item on the agenda is the declaration of interest. Members, do we have any declarations of interest? Councillor Waters?
No declaration of interest.
And Bailey McLaren? Next item is the minutes from the last meeting. I think I am the only person who sat on that committee today, so I'm happy with the minutes, so we can approve those. So that now takes us on to the first item on the agenda this morning, which is number 4.1. This is alteration and extension to a dwelling house at 29 Pitt Heveless Crescent in Perth. Mr. Burton, if you'd like to introduce for us. Thanks, Mr. Burton. My only question, one of the photographs you showed us had some dormer windows on another property, although they were just, well, classed as built around the window. But I noticed when I was there, further back was one other house with a sizable dormer on it. Does that not set some form of precedent in the area, or it isn't on your photograph? It's beyond that, I think. I remember it had an orange colouring around it. That's on the back of my mind. Thank you. Bailey McLaren, any questions? And Councillor Waters.
Thank you, convener. Just in as far as the extension goes, the officer was quite happy with the extension to the rear of the property. It's just about the mass of the dormer. Do we know how much of the roof space it takes up, the dormer? Is it quite considerably? Get a rough idea from the drawings. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, members. So, given where we are, members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Bailey McLaren. Councillor Waters.
Happy to proceed.
And I too am happy to proceed on this one. I think we know from the report itself that the extension on the ground floor, basement level, is acceptable by the planning officers, and that's noted in the report. However, looking at this case overall, it is the massing of the dormer window which is causing the concern. Having been there myself and looked at the property and what Mr. Burton was saying, I think in this case it is this dormer which is causing the problem, and I feel on this occasion I'm going to have to refuse the appeal. I think it's the dormer. It needs to be reassessed and re-looked at. The drawing of it needs to be looked at, possibly considering what is intended on that floor, perhaps can be adjusted. But as it stands at the moment, bearing in mind the shallow roof that there is on the building as it stands, it would be a considerable dominant structure, and the massing, as the officer said, would be too much, and therefore at this stage I'm going to have to refuse the appeal. Bailey McLaren.
Thank you, convener. That mic works. Based on the photographs, the report of handling, viewing the property, I too believe that the dormer would be overly dominant, highly visible within the area, and agree with the policy 16 MPF 4. So I too would uphold the refusal decision.
And Councillor Waters.
Thank you, convener. As far as the extension to the back go, and I think it enhances the property in the area, given the topography of the ground and the dormer. I think it does have a very, very prominent overlooking, and especially given the mass of it, I think more than anything, that will be visible from all around. So I have to concur and go with refusal, and on the same reasons given by the officers.
Thank you, Councillor. So, Mr. Elliott, we have a unanimous decision to refuse at this stage. So I'm sorry we have a refusal, but I would give a bit of hope that we've all accepted that the extension is acceptable, as the officers have, and you are able to put a new application in without charge within 12 months. It's that dormer needs to be reassessed. I think that's what it's about. So I'm sorry if it's a refusal, but I think it can be sorted out without too much extra cost to you. Thank you. So members. Yes, the microphones are playing. Can we have a reset? Have a recess for 5 minutes so we sort this out? Thank you. It's working, but it's no, you did that.
This one's not. This one is. Thank you, and apologies for the short recess, technological problems. Members, we're now moving on to item 4.2. This is the change of use, alterations and extension to Stedding to form dwelling house 50 metres east of Borland Farm, Glendevon Dollar. Mr. Burton, if you'd like to introduce for us.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take you through the pictures. You can see the application site in red, and as you can see, it's a fair distance up a hill from the A823 Glendevon Farm. You can see the other farm buildings immediately to the left of the application site. Next slide, please. That's on the road to the farm, looking down back towards the main road. Next slide, please. And then looking towards the farmhouse is ahead. The building on the right-hand side is a steading building that's used for storage, and the application steading is beyond that building to the right. Next slide, please. So that's the application building. You can see the gable of the building that was in the previous picture to the right-hand side. The steading shown in its entirety there is the subject of this application. Next slide, please. That's looking at the steading from the actual courtyard in front of the farmhouse. Next slide, please. This is the rear of the steading. Well, that's the rear of the steading adjacent to the farmhouse. That's taken from the front of the steading, which is the subject of this application. You can see it's the ground falls away from the level of the farmhouse and the steading adjacent to the farmhouse. Next slide, please. Yep, thank you. So this is the application property. You can see it's not in the best condition. The roof looks as if it's sagging a little, so it does it does need some attention, clearly. Next slide, please. and that's looking at the building from above. You can see there's a fairly significant levels difference from the surrounding ground. Next slide, please. Looking at the rear of the steading, you can see the ground level is raised at the rear, almost up to the eaves level at one point. So this is where the extension would be built. It would come from the rear of the existing steading and would project to the left of the photograph here. Next slide, please. And that's looking back at the rear of the application property. That's the area the extension would be built in. Next slide, please. And that's inside the actual steading at the moment. You can see it is used for storage. Next slide, please. So plan permission is sought for the refurbishment and conversion of a single-storey stone-built steading building and its extension to form a detached dwelling at Borland Farm, Glendevon. The steading building stands approximately 50 metres to the east of the farmhouse. The steading is one of two stone steading buildings immediately to the east of the farmhouse. The other steading is used for storage. It's proposed to convert the steading building, which is currently in a state of disrepair, to form a bedroom, bathroom, utility room and snug. A single-storey extension to the east would accommodate an open-plan kitchen, dining, living room, 3 bedrooms, bathroom and study. The new element would be finished with timber cladding and a slate roof. It would be linked to the existing building by a flat roof section in order to separate it visually from the existing stone steading. Part of the roof of the extension would be flat to keep the ridge line of the new element below that of the existing building. The farmhouse and steading buildings are listed Category B. To summarise the applicant's case, the farm is owned by the applicant's father, who is considering retirement, following which the farm would be run by the applicants. The farmhouse has 2 bedrooms, making it impractical as a family home for the applicants, who would need to reside on the farm. Policy 19 pardon me, of the Local Development Plan, Housing in the Countryside, supports developments which would form part of a building group, Category 1 of the Supplementary Guidance. It's contended that the proposal fits into that category as well as Category 5, the conversion of redundant traditional buildings, under which the proposal is assessed in the handling report. The farmhouse and surrounding buildings form a group which are, as the guidance specifies, 3 or more buildings at least equal in size to a traditional cottage. If one accepts this, the new build element proposed would represent 25.2% of the existing group footprint. The supplementary guidance supports new buildings and groups as long as they respect the group's character, scale and form, and are integrated into the existing layout and building pattern. The proposed dwelling achieves this in view of its design and materials and location within the group. It would not, in addition, detract from the visual amenity of the group and would create a high standard of amenity for the new dwelling while not harming that of the existing farmhouse. The relevant policy in National Planning Framework 4 is 17, rural homes, which require rural homes to be of high quality and sustainably located. The high quality of the proposed dwelling is clear, and the new house would be sustainable in that it would facilitate the future managers of the farm to live there. It's noted that the report of handling does not include an assessment of the proposal against the policy criteria set out in Policy 1A and B, placemaking of the Local Development Plan, or Policy 14, design quality and space of National Planning Framework 4, relying instead on a list of building policies. The result is a decision which is not balanced as required, specifically by National Planning Framework 4. Local Development Plan Policy 17 supports the sympathetic restoration of listed buildings, provided these do not impact on its special interest. The design and format of the addition to the steading ensure that it's clearly separate from and subservient to the existing building. The condition of the building is such that there is a need for remedial action to ensure its survival. This proposal would ensure the continued survival and productive use of the listed building. To summarise the handling report, Policy 9 of National Planning Framework 4 seeks to encourage the reuse and conversion of empty buildings, and Policy 17 seeks to encourage sustainable homes in the right location, including the reuse of redundant buildings. Policy 19 of the Local Development Plan, Housing in the Countryside, is also relevant. The supplementary guidance that accompanies this policy has a number of categories that support the creation through conversion of single houses. The proposal is considered to fall into Category 5, which allows the conversion of traditional buildings into residential accommodation, including a limited amount of new building. Up to 25% of the floor space of the building is allowed under the guidance. It's accepted that the listed status of the building means there could be scope for an extension larger than 25%, but the proposed extension is substantially larger than the host building, resulting in it dominating the existing structure. Category 1 building groups is not considered to be relevant, as it refers to new housing, which is taken to be new build housing rather than extension to an existing building. The application property is part of a listed group, Category B, which means that Policy 7 of National Planning Framework 4 and Policy 27A of the Local Development Plan, which have a presumption in favour of proposals which should retain and restore listed buildings, apply. These changes, however, should not adversely affect the character or appearance of the listed building. The applicant engaged in pre-application discussion with the Council when it was pointed out that the scale of the proposed extension meant the proposal would not accord with policies or the Council's guidance on housing in the countryside. The submitted drawings are no smaller than those submitted at pre-application stage. While it's agreed there could be scope for a more appropriately scaled extension, and it's acknowledged that the proposed low-level link is a sympathetic way of extending the listed building, an extension of the scale proposed would be at odds with the existing pattern of development and would not complement its surroundings in terms of appearance and scale. Representations, 5 letters of support were received to the application, which give the view that the new dwelling created would allow the reuse of an existing building, would allow the farmer's family to move to the farm and run it, would support the rural economy and the farm itself, would enhance the local community, and would allow natural surveillance of the area. 2 of the people who submitted letters of support have also submitted letters of support to the local review body, which are included in the papers before you. Material considerations, Policies 7, 9 and 17 of National Planning Framework 4 and Policies 27A and 19 of the Local Development Plan, along with supplementary guidance on housing in the countryside, are relevant. Some observations on the proposal. The proposal to reuse a traditional listed building is welcomed and is recognised that the extension is sited and designed in a way that attempts to minimise its impact. But the committee must take a view of whether the scale of the extension proposed is appropriate, both in terms of the housing and the countryside guidance and the listed building to which it would be attached. Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. Bailey McLaren, any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Burton. Yeah, very simple question. Is, when we're talking about the building, are we taking into account this area at the back, the sort of wooden lean-to? I don't know if...
I don't think that would be taken into account, Bailey, because it's not part of the original building. To be honest, I'm not entirely sure if it's taken into account in the floor space calculation that the applicant has given us.
Yeah, that was where my question was sort of surrounding as to whether that was coming into play, because there's been a lot of conversation around the size of the extension. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Watts.
Thank you, convener. There seems to be 2 policies at play here. One is looking at the council's policies on the amount of an extension should be about 25% or under, and then we have within NPF F4 this concept that where you have a listed building, you're in the interest of protecting it or enhancing it, or the listed perspective, you can do an extension on that. I know the applicant kind of mentioned that they were looking at the 25% as the whole group of houses, but just understanding the precedent, because this is the real challenge with this one, is the applicant is clearly desiring to protect the listed building, but there is quite a large extension, which on my guess, without any dimensions, must be at least 2.5 times the existing building. Where does that, what weight do we put to each of these policies when coming to a decision on this? Thank you.
Yeah, the handling report makes the point that because the steading is listed, there could be a greater degree of flexibility about the floor space of any extension. So if it were to go above 25%, that would be seen as acceptable, as it was helping to protect and save and reuse a listed building. What isn't made clear in the report is just how high that would go, because I think that's a figure that most of us would find difficult to specify. So the judgment really is on whether the size of the extension, which, as you say, looks to be more than twice the size of the existing steading, is appropriate, and whether the listed building allows that scale of extension in itself.
Mr. Burton, just to kind of follow on from Councillor Waters' question, it's a point I just want to clarify. This 25%. The planning officer talks about 25% increase of the floor space of the steading itself that we're looking at. The agent in the appeal papers talks about 25% of the whole area. It seems a bit of ambiguity there. I just want to clarify that point. My reading would be 25% of the steading, but he talks about 25% of the building group as a whole.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The category 5 of the guidance produced by the council is about conversion or replacement of redundant traditional non-domestic buildings, and on the second page of that particular part of the guidance, there is a reference to no more than 25% of the total units or footprint should comprise new build development. It's not 100% clear from that part of the guidance that it just to what it relates. The fact that this is about a conversion, the category is about the conversion of non-domestic buildings, would suggest to me that the 25% should relate to the building that has been converted, rather than other buildings that might be part of the building group.
And another question was, when we had a photograph of the rear of the steading, obviously the land was up nearly to the eaves, you said. I mean, I just want, is that how it was built, or has the land moved up to it over the course of time? And I presume that the extension will be dug down to reduce its height back down to the steading height.
I can't answer the first part of that question, Councillor. I have no idea. But I wasn't there, no. But yes, the proposal would involve a fair amount of cut. So the ground would be scraped to provide a level platform for the extension, and the rear wall of the listed building would be cleared.
Okay, well, as we have no further questions, members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us, and that is the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Bailey McLaren?
Happy to proceed.
And Councillor Waters?
Happy to proceed.
Thank you, members. Then Bailey McLaren, would you like to kick off for us?
Thank you, convener. Yeah, this is a difficult decision, has to be said, all things considered, but I am in favour of granting. In prevention of creating another ruin in the countryside, the retention of a listed building, the applicants are clearly committed to the building. So I am in favour of granting the application. Thank you.
Councillor Waters?
Thank you, convener. As far as Bailey McLaren said, this is difficult because we can look at two policies that can give totally different answers to this. On the 25%, and my reading of it all to understand it is because we're trying to and fully respect the applicant's desire to restore the listed building aspect. It's very difficult, and as the answers were, to judge what scale do you have to do to justify that, which is what makes it so difficult. But I'm going to agree with Bailey McLaren here and actually permit the development based on the NPF policy. And I think it's policy, I did have it open on the LDP side, 29 something at the top of my head. Policy 7 of NPF 4, and there was an LDP policy 27A. Is that the right one? And policy 27A on listed buildings, and so hence I will go with the appeal on the decision. Thank you.
Thank you, members. I should just remind you, they come to our desk because they are difficult. So they're always difficult. So let's get that clear straight away. This case has certainly good points. There's no objections from neighbours. In fact, they're all supporting it. And certainly, obviously, one of the main things here is that you're bringing a listed building back into use, which is an important factor. The guidance does talk about 25%, but in reality, if you were to convert this to a residence, you're going to have an extension on it. There's no way you could build a residence into the building as it was, even if you repair it completely. And I think in reality, in the modern day and living, 25% would not be sufficient. And the officer does mention that in the report, that it's not going to be enough, and you would have to go further than that. The guidance we have is guidance, is not absolute, of course. There are always exceptions here. And looking at the pictures, the photographs that we have, I am going to concur with my colleagues. I think this is a way forward. It won't be seen clearly from the road because it's been cut into the ground. It's bringing a listed building back into use, which is an important factor. And obviously there are other factors. We talk about people being on the farm, that they can work locally, which is obviously another factor. It's not a planning issue, but it's there. So my thoughts are, yes, it's going to help a listed building and bring that back into use. That's the first thing. And it's an extension, which I feel is necessary for family use, and I think that overrides any matters. As I said, the guidance is not absolute, and we already accept in the report that 25% would be nowhere near enough to accommodate my modern family. So, Mr. Elliott, we have a unanimous decision to approve.
Thank you, Convener. My understanding, members, is of course unanimously granting the application, and listening to what you've said, you do consider it contrary to Statute of Housing and Countryside supplementary guidance because of being in excess of 25% for the additional footprint. However, you've taken into account that it's going to bring a listed building back into use. And if I heard correctly, and this is the last bit I want to be careful on, is essentially you don't think that the extension is going to have an adverse impact on the general grouping. Okay? Yeah.
So we have a unanimous decision. Your appeal has been granted, so it's done. Okay, thank you very much. Worth the visit then. Thank you. Now our audience is completely gone. We're going to move on to number 3 now. You could stay and keep us company. So, members, we now move on to number 4.3. This is another alteration and extension. Alterations and extension to a dwelling house at Ardbeg, North Street, Bubbleton, in Blackgowrie. Mr. Burton, if you could introduce for us.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take you through the photographs as ever. First slide, please. Yeah, so the outline red, the site is shown outlined in red. You can see it's part of a semi-detached house with the one immediately to the south, and you can see there's a fairly extensive garden and fields beyond that. You can also see in the surrounding houses some similar extensions out the back of the adjacent house, which also has a dormer, and further down the next one along is also been extended. Next slide, please. So the front of the house, there's a shared driveway which is shared with the house to the right, and you can see the two garages at the end of that. They are jointly owned. The one on the left is used by the applicant. The one on the right by the occupant of the house on the right hand side. Next slide, please. Just looking up the driveway towards the rear. Next slide, please. The next slide, please. Sorry. Okay. Okay. This slide shows the existing lean-to extension at the back of the house and the garden beyond. You can also see in the distance a roof of what looks to me like a kind of conservatory extension. That's not the next door house, but the one beyond that. Next slide, please. So you can see the original cottage and the 1950s flat roofed extension. Next slide, please. This is looking back at the house. Now, the extension would project roughly as far as the bush you can see on the left-hand side there, and would just spring from the rear wall of the house. Next slide, please. And looking the other direction, from standing beside the bush, which is where the extension would extend to, you can see the rear of the garden in the distance there. Next slide, please. The planning permission is sought for an extension to a semi-detached bungalow on North Street, Burlton, Blairgowrie. The house currently has a lounge, 2 bedrooms, and a small kitchen and bathroom and a small lean-to extension, which was built in the 1950s. A single-storey extension to the rear of the house is proposed, which would create a dining kitchen, bathroom, utility room and storage. The extension would be 7 metres long and 7.4 metres wide over part of its depth and 8.3 metres wide at the widest. It would have a flat roof with a glass cupola in the centre. To summarise the applicant's case, the proposals are intended to provide an enhanced standard of accommodation to the property, replacing a small, uninsulated extension that currently houses a small kitchen and bathroom in an inconvenient layout. The houses immediately to the north and south have similarly sized extensions, and it's contended that the proposal will not be detrimental to the residential amenity of any neighbours, and the report of handling confirms it would not lead to overdevelopment of the rear garden. To summarise the handling report, the proposed extension projects 7.1 metres from the house, compared to the depth of the house, which is 6.3 metres, so it would be disproportionately large, contrary to the placemaking guide, which states an extension should be a subordinate addition in all respects. The extension would also be located 250 millimetres from the boundary with the adjoining semi-detached bungalow, so the extension would severely adversely impact the residential amenity of the adjoining property. The proposed extension has a footprint of 66.6 square metres, which is 93% of the footprint of the original house. This is a reflection on the excessive proportions of the extension. Account has been taken of surrounding extensions. However, it is considered that refusal would be in line with Policy 14C of National Planning Framework 4, which states that development proposals that are poorly designed and detrimental to the amenity of the surrounding area will not be supported, and Policies 1A, 1BC and 17C of the Local Development Plan and the Placemaking Guide 2020 which seek to ensure that developments contribute positively to the quality of the surrounding built environment in terms of design, position, proportions and appearance. No representations were received to the application. Material considerations: Policy 14C of National Planning Framework 4, Policy 1A and 1B, and 17C of the Local Development Plan, pardon me, and the Perth and Kinross Placemaking Supplementary Guidance 2020 are all relevant. The proposed, some observations: the proposed extension is similar in size to some other local extensions nearby, but it stands to be assessed against relevant current policies. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. Councillor Waters, any questions?
Thank you, convener. The neighbouring property that's adjoining is a kind of detached element. The extension on that one is the proposed extension the same, and is there any? Because one of the reasons for refusal was due to the neighbouring property, and is there anything detrimental to the directly neighbouring property if this extension was developed?
You can see in the overhead that's on the screen just now, Councillor, that the other half of the semi-detached property also has a rear extension, which would be similar in depth in how far back it goes into the garden to the extension proposed here. I have to say the extension proposed here is wider at its over part of its part of its depth. It's the entire width of the house. It does narrow as it gets towards the garage. So the extension, while a similar length to that next door, is wider. It also has a flat roof, as the next door extension does, and the flat roof helps to reduce any impact on the neighbours. Yeah.
And relating to any objections when this application was proposed, is there any objections or?
There were no objections to the application, no.
Thank you, that's all my questions.
I have a question myself, Mr. Burton. The plans show no windows on this side of the extension, which would be facing the adjacent property. I presume from the height of it, there'll be no overshadowing or anything like that we're concerned about.
It is quite close to the boundary. Because it's got a flat roof, I think overshadowing would be fairly minimal. There is a fence there already.
Yeah, Bailey McLaren, any questions?
Not overly so, just a small access. The access to the property, I note it's a narrow lane. There's one vehicle. Do we need to have an account of how many parking bays is available within, not to cause neighbourly issues?
The plans, the site plan shows that the area in front of the garage, the applicant's garage, would be available for parking. So I suppose, yes, there would be a reduction in the amount of parking in that area immediately behind the house would be built up, but there would still be parking for one vehicle, I would say in front of the garage. There's also no restriction on parking on North Street at that point.
Okay, members, then can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Waters?
Happy to proceed, convener.
And Bailey McLaren?
Happy to proceed.
Okay, fine, thank you. And I too am happy to proceed. So Councillor Waters, if you'd like to start off.
Thank you. You know, when you look at the you know, the drawings of the current house, and you know, it's very difficult to get away from the idea of how constrained that is, with exceptionally small kitchen and various areas like that. The kind of, and I know precedent isn't what we're considering here, but there is quite a precedent within the area for similar sized extensions. I on balance would go with the appeal, and allow the extension to be developed within that. I think there's no housing in the countryside doesn't apply here, so there's no restriction on that. So and I feel that for the needs of a modern day house, it would fulfil the needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I too, I think on this occasion, I'm going to concur with you. It is quite an old style building, cottage style, and you can see from the plans, and when you're there, you can see how reasonably small it is. And obviously, an extension, because of that size, to have a moderate extension is going to have to be larger, or large-ish. And I think I appreciate this one's going to be bigger than the main house, but because of the size of the main house, as I say, to get a livable space, I think you're going to have to show some flexibility here. There are extensions elsewhere on the area, one right next door. I'd be happy, I think, to allow the appeal on this one. It will give the living space more of a modern area to live with for the family there. So I'm happy to grant the appeal. Bailey McLaren.
Thank you. Well, I too am very much of a similar thinking to both yourself, Convener, and Councillor Waters. Modern day living, these properties, when they were first constructed, long number of years ago, are small modern day living and healthy living. We have an extension here that isn't insulated. It's a poorer construction. So yes, there is a consideration of the size of the extension, taking the whole length of the property, but on reflection, I am also happy to agree and overturn the officer's decision.
So, Mr. Elliott, we have a unanimous decision again.
Thank you, Convener. What I have is you've unanimously granted the application, and if I've heard correctly, really you're saying it accords with the development plan, taking into account the whole circumstances of the area. Okay.
So members will now move on to number 4.4 on our agenda. This is a change of use of a flat to form short-term let accommodation unit in principle at 21 Rayburn Park in Perth. Mr. Burton, if you'd like to introduce this one.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take you through the pictures. You see the outline in red, the flat outlined in red is part of a larger block, and the flat in question is part of the block which projects towards the rear of the flatted block towards the car park area. Next slide, please. While we're waiting for the next slide, you can see the front entrance to the block of flats quite clearly there. There's also a rear entrance, which we'll see. Right, so that's the front entrance to the flats. Next slide, please. looking around the corner towards the parking area around the side of the flats. Next slide, please. Right, this is a picture of the rear of the block. The application property is the ground floor bay window, and the windows to the window to the side, and the one to the side of that. You can see to the right of the window, to the side, the window near the bay. That's the rear door of the block of flats. So the appellant, the agent talks about only passing the first flat you come to. That is using that door. If you use that rear door, the application flat is the first flat that you come to on the left-hand side. Next slide, please. And that's the rear door in question. The bay window to the left of that, and the single window to the left between the bay window and the door are part of the application property. Next slide, please. So that's looking at the car park. There's a dedicated parking space for the flat. Next slide, please. I think that's them all anyway. Retrospective planning permission is sought for the use of a 2-bedroom flat at Rayburn Park, Perth as a short-term let. The flat's on the ground floor of a 3-storey block of flats in the residential area, close to the railway station and city centre. It has 2 bedrooms, a lounge, kitchen and bathroom. There is a dedicated parking space in the shared car park to the rear. The flat is accessed via a shared hallway and has been used as a short-term let since September 2022. To summarise the applicant's case, National Planning Framework 4, Policy 32, seeks to balance the loss of residential accommodation to short-term let accommodation against a demonstrable benefit to the local economy. It states that support will not be given to short-term lets if there is an unacceptable impact on local amenity. It's clear from the time period the application flat has been running that it has no impact on local amenity, as there have been no objections raised by the immediate neighbours or by anyone in the area. The flat is in high demand and is mostly full throughout the year. Guests use local shops, bars and restaurants or visit local attractions. Something Perth's businesses need. All the customers, something Perth's businesses need. It is clear that the loss of the flat as residential accommodation is outweighed by local economic benefit. The Local Housing Strategy 2022-27 includes an action to develop policy to limit the numbers of short-term let properties in residential areas. The consultation response of the Housing Strategy team states that the saturation level of short-term lets for the PH2 area, the area that the flat is in, is only 1.1%, and therefore below the level at which it may be considered appropriate to introduce a control area. Policy 17D of the Perth and Kinross Local Development Plan supports, under Category D, business, homeworking, tourism or leisure activities, the application. The flat is within a 5-minute walk from the railway station and bus station, has a dedicated parking space, making it ideal for visitors. It has a high occupancy rate and is therefore cleaned top to bottom on a very regular basis, generally 2 to 3 times a week. The public access space is also cleaned to maintain a high presentation level, making a significant contribution to local amenity. The plan layout of each floor of the block is divided into 3 flats. The party walls are limited, reducing the possibility of sound transmission between adjoining properties. The flats are arranged so the lounge and kitchen areas are furthest from its neighbour, again limiting transmission of any noise. The plan layout of the public area means that guests do not pass any other flat entrance door. The application flat door is the first door after the rear entrance door, so no disturbance to other flats on the ground floor is caused. In addition, the use of the flat for short-term lets is not incompatible with Policy 1B placemaking of the Local Development Plan. To summarise the handling report, the National Planning Framework 4 Policy 30E Tourism states that development proposals for the reuse of existing buildings for short-term holiday lets will not be supported where the proposal will result in an unacceptable impact on local amenity or character, or the loss of residential accommodation, where such loss is not outweighed by demonstrable local economic benefit. While the proposed use of the property as a short-term let would not be significantly different from a flat in terms of its physical appearance, the high turnover of guests accessing the shared entrance and hallway could cause disturbance to neighbouring residents, with an associated adverse impact on the safety and perceived safety that could erode residential character and amenity of the block and surrounding area. The proposal would also result in the loss of residential accommodation, and there is little demonstrable evidence provided to demonstrate any economic benefit. As such, the proposed loss of an existing dedicated residence in this instance is not outweighed by the expected economic benefits. The proposal is therefore unacceptable as it conflicts with NPF 4 Policy 30E1 and 2 Tourism and the intent of Local Development Plan Policies 1A and B Placemaking and 17 Residential Areas. There were no representations received. Material considerations, National Planning Framework 4 Policy 30E Tourism and Policies 1A and 1B of the Local Development Plan are relevant. Some observations. The Local Housing Strategy 2022 to 27 includes an action to develop planning policy through the Local Development Plan 3 where appropriate for short-term let control areas. The Scottish Government has recently introduced new legislation which will enable councils to designate specific areas where short-term lets will be controlled. Perth is not identified by the housing strategy as having a high concentration of properties used as short-term lets, but it remains to be seen whether it will become a short-term let control area. Notwithstanding this, the Council has introduced new planning guidance on short-term lets, which was not taken into account in the determination of this application, simply because it wasn't available, and which the applicant was also not aware of. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. And I think you've touched on a subject which does give me a little bit of concern, is that this new guidance, which has been issued very recently, we don't have a copy of that guidance in our pack to start with. And as you said, the paperwork was prepared prior to that being that guidance been issued. So I'm going to suggest to colleagues that possibly we defer this. Defer it for Development Management and Planning Officer to review the case in conjunction with the new non-statutory guidance, and also to give the applicants that opportunity to make comment on that. I'm just checking if hopefully you'll be in agreement with that. I think that's the best way forward because it's very new guidance, and I think it's only fair for both parties to have a chance to discuss. Bailey McLaren.
I'm happy to agree with your proposal, and it is right that we do so to give the applicant, the best possible chance of being aware of all the facts. Thank you.
And Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Convener. I likewise share your concern and feel it's a wise decision to defer this and allow parties to assess the new policies coming forward for guidance.
So, Mr. Elliott, I'll pass the microphone over to you, but it looks like we're unanimous to defer for this to be consulted.
Thank you, Convener. I think unanimously you wish to defer. I think it would be, I'm well aware there's now new non-statutory planning guidance on short-term lets. That wasn't before the officers when doing the refusal. It was only the draft consultation guidance that has changed its nature since it's finalised. But could I suggest that you are deferring firstly for development management and secondly for the review applicant to comment on that non-statutory guidance and how it relates to the review application, and do it in that order. So it's development management first, applicant second, to avoid a lot of crossover of comments, and then also for a copy of the, as you mentioned it, Convener, a copy of the finalised non-statutory planning guidance to be placed before the LRB at the next available meeting. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Elliott, put it so succinctly for us. Thank you very much. So that now moves us on to the next item, which is number 4.5. Now, colleagues, once again, we are looking at a short-term let review. And given the comments from that, and then my comments on this one, and our agreement before, I'm going to suggest to both of you an agreement that we defer this one as well for exactly the same reasons. I think only fair to all parties to do so. So, Benny McLaren, are you happy with that?
Happy, thank you.
And Councillor Waters?
I fully agree, especially given this one had the policy stuff mentioned as a draft element within it. Thank you.
So, Mr. Elliott, we're looking at the deferment on this one as well, and I presume the wording will be exactly the same as what you've done before. Yeah. Okay. So let's get that one deferred. Okay, members. So that now brings us to the last item on the agenda this morning, which is a case which is coming back to us. Now, this is item 5.1. This is the part demolition, alterations and extension to a dwelling house at Forest Lodge, Ladywell, Burnham. So I'll ask Mr. Elliott, as none of you were on the panel the last time, if you could introduce the case once again. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I'll take you through the pictures, which were taken, which haven't been revisited. They were taken at the time, so there's a few more leaves on the trees. So the first slide, please. The application site is in red. You can see it's on the opposite side of the A9 from Dunkeld and Burnham, and it's in a kind of a clearing in the woods. It's also, what you can't make out there, it's significantly higher than the old military road, and it's down a fairly long track from the main road. Next slide, please. So that's the track that leads to the house from the main road. As you can see, it's quite secluded. Next slide, please. And looking towards the house, the track becomes even less as it moves, as it gets to the house, and you can see the height of the trees. Certainly behind it, they're also similar height to the right-hand side, more open to the left-hand side, but there are trees there as well. Next slide, please. So you can see the house is quite a striking standalone house within a cleared area. Next slide, please. And that's looking from inside the gates to the house back towards the driveway, which leads from the main road. Next slide, please. So you can see in this picture where there was a porch which has been removed. The house, as you can see, is surrounded by trees, and there is a garage there, which from memory is to be removed. Next slide, please. And you can see on this side, which is the side where the proposed extension would be attached to. You can see there's been work done to remove a kind of porch detail to this side as well. Next slide, please. The side facing the garage is the side where the house would, the extension would be attached. The extension would sit slightly behind the house, so it would be largely on the grassed area, close to where the chairs and the table are situated on the grass. Next slide, please. And that's a picture from the other side, where the extension would be on the opposite side of the house from there. Next slide, please. Okay, planning permission is sought for the part demolition, alterations and extension to a two-storey detached house at Ladywell, Burnham, Dunkeld. The house has a kitchen, dining room and bedroom on the ground floor, 3 bedrooms and bathroom upstairs. The house is isolated, surrounded on all sides by mature woodland, and is not visible from the A822, from which it's reached by means of a private track. It's proposed to demolish 2 single-storey porches to the front and side of the house, and as we saw from the pictures, these have already been demolished, and to demolish a freestanding garage and build a 2-storey linked extension which will have a bedroom, garage and storage at ground level and a sitting room at first floor level. As part of the project, it's proposed to reconfigure the interior of the existing house to provide a dining kitchen, snug TV room and office on the ground floor, and to retain the 3 bedrooms and bathroom upstairs. The extension is proposed at a slight angle to the main house, linked by a 2-storey element which will form a new front door and entrance hall at ground level and a link corridor to the new sitting room at upper level. It's proposed to be finished in dark timber cladding with a dark pre-patinated zinc roof. To summarise the applicant's case, it's proposed that all site structures are consolidated into a new complementary building to the north of the existing house. The proposed orientation of the extension will provide a sense of enclosure to the entry court, while the separation and angle from the house allows the lodge to be seen in its original form. The materials proposed for the extension are dark opaque thermopine enhanced timber cladding, in order that it will be seen as different from the original house and will blend with the forest. The lower roof height and smaller massing will ensure that it is viewed as subservient to the main house. The proposed extension would ensure that the site is not overdeveloped and the whole building's environmental impact can be minimised. It's proposed to modify the existing house as well as providing an extension in order to maximise the potential for increasing fuel efficiency and improving its insulation. To summarise the handling report, the proposed extension would visually compete with a host dwelling house rather than complement it. Although its scale is subordinate to the house, its poorly integrated design results in a fragmented appearance with a piecemeal wraparound addition. Its visually incongruous appearance would be exacerbated by the sharply contrasting finishing materials. Accordingly, refusal is in line with Policy 14C of National Planning Framework 4, and approval would be contrary to Policies 14A and 16G of National Planning Framework 4, Policies 1A and 1BC of the Local Development Plan, and the Perth and Kinross Placemaking Guide 2020. The application site is located within the River Tay National Scenic Area. However, the domestic scale and nature of the proposal does not raise any significant landscape impact issues. The proposal involves demolition of various existing features which have the potential for bat roosts, a protected species, so it's necessary to secure an ecological survey to identify the presence of any bats, bat roosts or bird nests, so that an assessment can be made over the impact of the development, whether any impact can be avoided, and whether any mitigation measures are necessary. Without an ecological survey, the proposal is not in accordance with Policy 4F of National Planning Framework 4 or Policy 41 of the Local Development Plan. There are no representations. Material considerations are National Planning Framework 4, Policies 4, 14 and 16G, Household Developments, Local Development Plan Policies 1A, 1BC and 41, and Council Guidance on Placemaking and the Protection of Bats are relevant. Addendum to this application. The appeal documentation includes Phase 1 and Phase 2 bat route assessment, but this had not been appraised by the Council's ecological officer when the application was first placed before this committee on the 14th of August. The application was deferred to allow time for a full ecological survey to be completed, submitted and assessed before a decision was taken. In response, the applicants take the view, following advice from their own ecology consultant, that the ecology report which had been submitted is sufficient and ask that it is assessed by the Council. An email from the case officer confirms that the submitted bat survey is in accordance with best practice and its conclusions are agreed. The case officer suggests the following conditions attached should planning permission be granted. The conclusions and recommended action points within the supporting biodiversity survey submitted and hereby approved shall be fully adhered to, respected and undertaken as part of the construction phase of development to the satisfaction of the Council as planning authority. Accordingly, the committee is now free to make a decision on the case.
Thanks, Mr. Burton. I have no questions. Councillor Waters?
I don't think I have any questions either, thank you.
And Bailey McLaren?
So far in agreement. Don't have any questions.
Fine, thank you very much. So let's look at this now. Members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us, that is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? I am happy to proceed. Councillor Waters?
Happy to proceed, convener.
And Bailey McLaren?
Happy to proceed, convener.
Fine, thank you very much. So I'll start this one as I was on the obviously on the original panel. Obviously, as Mr. Burton's mentioned, this was deferred for the report, and we've had that looked at by planning officers that have come back and said they're unhappy with it. They're accepting it, I think, and we have a condition there ready to go ahead with if we proceed. This is an unusual extension, undoubtedly, and one to be considered carefully. But the location of the property itself, I think, is a consideration here. It is, as the photographs have shown, quite isolated in itself. The extension would be difficult to see from the track, even I think when the leaves have been dropped partially on the trees, shaded leaves. And certainly it sits up above from the road, so it's not something you can see quite easily from that level. And there's obviously no other properties around it, so. It's also an unusual design of house to start with, and this pyramid style of roofing, which would make an extension quite difficult to add to it, I think. So on balance, although it's a slightly difficult, a different type of extension, I'm on balance considering to grant the appeal on this one. I think it's the seclusion of the property, I think, is one of the main considerations here. Obviously, it may be detrimental to the property, but that's for the applicants to consider when they have to eventually sell it. And it may obviously affect the price of the property they can get for it. So on balance, mainly because I think of the location, it's the isolation, I'm happy to grant the appeal. Councillor Waters.
Thank you, convener. Just in summarising, can I just ask, sorry, a question related to the decision? Is it possible to, if and I agree with what Councillor Braun has said there, with quite a lot of stuff, but is it possible to also add a condition in that they send some swaps of the colour of the timber? And related to the repainting on the house as well, just for consideration by officers and approval. Would that be competent to add that as an extra condition if my colleagues would be minded to, or Councillor Braun would be minded to?
Certainly, it's open to the committee to add any conditions it thinks appropriate, if it takes a decision to grant the permission, including finishing materials and colours.
Yes. I will agree and go with the appeal on this one. On addition of a condition for the finishing and the colours for the extension and the a representation of the current building, which seems to be going to get repainted in some way. Thank you.
And Bailey McLaren.
Thank you, convener. I am broadly in favour with granting this appeal, but my concern, which was raised within the reports, was about the zinc roof, the material. That was one of the reasons for refusal. Not having the knowledge, the building knowledge, to say, to state slate, but equally, I am questioning that product. Trying to find it in the papers. It was highlighted in the first refusal, was it not? Correct me. Where am I? Right, okay. Inappropriate materials. So possibly Mr. Burton could help me out on this as to be specific for a condition. Thank you.
As I understand it, Councillor, you're talking about a condition which would change the roofing materials. Yeah. Certainly that is a condition that could be applied by the committee. I would suggest a little bit of caution about having too many conditions about changing all the elements of this, because the design of the extension is trying to achieve a certain look, a certain impression, and changing the materials or the colours of the walls and the roof might be difficult for officers to agree with the applicants. That's the only concern I have.
Okay, thank you for that advice. I shall withdraw that possibility of a condition and just have a broad in agreement with Councillor Braun and Councillor Waters to grant approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry McLaren. Just to clarify, you're happy with the extra condition that Councillor Waters wants?
Sorry, yes, I am. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Elliott, we're only unanimous. I'm happy to have that condition ended in as well, so we're unanimous on this one. Yep, do you need it? Okay. Okay, members, that was the last paper this morning, so we are finished today. Thank you very much for your participation, as always, and thank you once again for changing the days to help out on my situation. So that's the closure, and thank you again.